Hello, I'm Nick Tyrone, neoliberal centrist dad. Thank you for joining me today. That's my producer, Barra, just crossing over. Thank you for joining me, and I know you will have probably clicked on this if you're not a previous viewer because of the contentious title that I'm going to give this particular video, but I am promising to deal with the subject thoughtfully and rationally and in depth. So I'm going to call this something along the lines, is Trump a complete idiot? Is he a complete imbecile? Is he a total moron? You get the picture. And again, that seems just like a very contentious question meant to bring out partisan anger or feeling one way or another. Obviously, if you feel like you're sort of on the left, you will say, of course he is. If you're on the right, well, increasingly, maybe you will think he's an idiot. But anyhow, the question, I want to break down the question like this. Is Trump actually smarter than he appears? So if you take stuff like attacking Canada, or he's going to invade Greenland, or more pointedly, the tariffs, which it's worth saying right now goes completely against all right-wing economic orthodoxy held pretty much since the war. I mean, you couldn't go against the Reaganite sort of idea of how economics works more than the tariffs, really. So is all of that part of a calculated plan? And by that, I want to stress, I don't mean do I think that this will benefit the West in the long term, or there's a long-term plan where this is all going to work out. No, that's rubbish. That's not how it will work out. It will be bad for America. And in terms of being bad for the West, well, it depends on how the rest of the West, sorry, that's a mouthful, responds. So what I'm really mean is there some sort of self-centered purpose to what Trump is doing? Does he have deals somewhere that he's working on? Will this enrich him in some way that we just don't understand, and that's what we can't see, and that's why it all looks like insanity? But actually, Trump has some calculated reason for doing this that is in his long-term self-interest. Or, basically, yeah, the question, is he a moron? Does he have no idea how geopolitics works or how tariffs actually function in reality? Yeah, is he as stupid as his actions make him appear to be? I'm inclined, my hypothesis would be yes. I think that Trump is a sort of, I would define it as a sort of almost like a functional moron. There was something Penn Jillette, the famous magician, Penn and Teller, said about Trump once that has stuck in my brain. It came after Gillette had been on the American version of The Apprentice, so the one hosted by Trump. And he was asked about, his experience with Trump and what he thought of Trump. And Gillette said, I will read the entire quote because I think it's worth delving into. So he said, I thought he was wonderful at his job. Trump, he means. If you had anybody who was actually a business person on that show, it would be the worst show in the world because Bill Gates would make proper decisions and there'd be no surprises. You want someone capricious and crazy with no filter. And that's what we got. So he makes arbitrary decisions and the human brain tries desperately to make those make sense, and that ends up being some kind of entertainment. And this has always stuck with me whenever I see Trump because that's kind of how I think he operates. I think that's it. He just sort of doesn't have a filter, and because he was born into some money and some connections, his father being a successful real estate person, it sort of meant that he could kind of bluster his way through, and because he sort of doesn't seem to have any filter or conventional morality, he can kind of just run through, and most things just kind of work out for him, which I think probably says something really terrible about American society, but I don't want to go into that. I digress. I think one of the interesting things on that note about Trump was how much he broke the rules, and I was about to say change them, but I don't think he did change them, actually, because the same rules sort of seem to mostly still apply to most politicians, or at the very least, I think most politicians across the West have had difficulty trying to, use the Trumpian thing and get away with it and make it work for them. I think that somehow it works for Trump and it doesn't work for anyone else, which I think is interesting in and of itself. Probably the most interesting thing about Trump was, it was very difficult pre-Trump. You had to be sort of somewhat squeaky clean to become, to get into the place where you could be a successful enough politician in America to have a shot at the presidency. I mean, to give you some idea, Reagan struggled just by dint of having been divorced. That was considered enough. Trump, it was there was so much more sleaze and stuff going on there. You had all this stuff about, his businesses and all sorts of stuff that people were questioning there. The classic being, he owned a casino that went under. That's really actually difficult. It's really difficult to fail as a casino owner. I mean, it is just sort of one of the most infallible business models ever created by human beings, and yet he somehow managed to do it. So that was amazing that he just kept getting away with these. He kept breaking all the rules, and it was it was genuinely amazing to see. And I think that maybe in 2016 he cottoned onto a moment where, I've given him more credit for that. I think it was just actually the time was right for the Trump persona to succeed, because I think people were tired of the sort of this bubble that politicians lived in and the way they spoke about things, and just to have Trump kind of come out and it was just this like id being kind of exploded in their faces was kind of amazing. But coming back to the question of his general competence and what he's like, I've got a really good example, because Trump posted it's somewhere on social media. I don't know where Trump actually posts anymore. I'm assuming this was Twitter/X, but maybe it was Sphincter or whatever, the right wing thing that he started. What is that called? Anyway, you know what I mean. One of his social media outlets posted this, and I'm going to read it in full. I thought about doing this in the Trump voice. Should I do it in the Trump voice? I'll try. I'll do it. So this isn't a full-blown impression, but I think it's hard to just read this as a normal human being. You sort of have to put a bit of Trumpness into it. So this is Donald Trump posting to his followers. Mitch McConnell, Kentucky, Susan Collins of Maine, Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, and Rand Paul of Kentucky will hopefully get on the Republican bandwagon for a change and fight the Democrats on wild and flagrant push to not penalize Canada for the sale into our country of large amounts of fentanyl by tariffing the value of this horrible and deadly drug in order to make it more costly to distribute and buy. Anyway, he goes on and on and on. Something about Senate bill. I won't bore you anymore. You get the gist. Basically, there's so much to digest here on the question I posed in the title, is he an imbecile? Which is, okay, so first, a technical point to just get out of the way, that fentanyl is actually legally used in America, but in extremely limited circumstances, and all the fentanyl that will be used legally will be created within the United States. It's just an FDA thing. So that's clearly not what Trump is talking about. Right? There isn't any legal fentanyl being pumped into the country from Mexico or Canada or elsewhere, in fact. So what he's talking about is illegal fentanyl being smuggled into the United States of America by criminal gangs. So does he think tariffs will be applied to illegal drugs? I mean, I'm going to explain this. Everyone watching this is, I'm assuming, a normal, sentient human being who will completely understand this without having it to be explained, but it's worth explaining given the President of the United States has put this out there, which is either the drugs, right, these illegal drugs coming over the American border from Canada, as he said, they'll either be intercepted and then confiscated, so no tariffs will apply, obviously, in that case, or they will get through and be sold on the street as illicit drugs, in which case no tariffs will apply. It's also worth just mentioning here, there's so much wrong with so much that Trump says you can get lost in the detail, but it's worth also saying that apparently, according to American authorities, 98% of illegal fentanyl that's trafficked into America comes from Mexico, and about 1% or so comes from Canada. So it's not even actually that big a problem. Just the illegal side. But anyway, that's beyond the fact that tariffs would not obviously apply to illegal smuggled goods, just by definition. So, and again, I've explained this to you, and I've sort of had to, because just to get into what the substance of the matter, even though actually, a child would understand this, I think. Actually, I don't even think the child would have to be that intelligent, particularly, to understand that. But anyway, I digress. So yeah, I'll leave that with you. Leave a message in the comments for me, please. Do you think that Trump is an idiot, or do you think he has some sort of nefarious plan that we just don't know about? I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you want to tell me that Trump is actually a genius and this is all going to work out for the West and he's the savior, by all means, go for it. You have to have a pretty good argument, one that I haven't heard from anyone so far, to convince me on that. But give it a go if that's your cup of tea. Anyhow, moving along, I wanted to talk a little bit today as well about the whole Marine Le Pen issue. So for those who aren't aware, she's been found guilty of a crime, and she's what's the word? Very basic word. She's appealing, but the courts have decided that regardless of the appeal, she will not be able to run for president in 2027, which is the next French presidential election. So essentially, she has been barred from standing. And this has right away become a big thing on the right across the Western world. You've had Trump's put in about it today. Without actually, even if you haven't engaged with it on social media, you'll know the drill. It's about how France has fallen and democracy's dead across Western Europe. And look, I'm as wary as anyone about a judiciary making politically motivated judgments, but I think we have to keep, I think it's good if we can keep the justice system out of politics as much as possible. I think that's a good idea. I think there's always that danger in democracy that everything's seen as politically motivated and one side feels like it can shut the other side down through the judicial process, through the criminal justice system, and actually what you end up with is tit for tat, and everybody thinks that, and then it just becomes normalized, and that just becomes part of the political process, and I think that's really bad, and really, really bad for democracy. But I think it's worth saying that obviously you have to have a criminal justice system, and if someone breaks it, I think if Marine Le Pen had, murdered someone and it had been proven that had been the case, I think it would be, I don't think many people would be saying she should be allowed to stand. And okay, she didn't murder anybody. Let's make that clear. But to briefly explain what the crime that she has been found to be guilty of, and again, she's appealing, let's just put that in, but that she has been found guilty of in a French court of law is basically parties who get representation in the European Parliament are given money. So they're given EU money for various things, to run their offices in Brussels and Strasbourg, to cover some other expenses. One of the things they're allowed to do with that money is gather with like-minded parties. So if they're in a group, like the European People's Party or whatever the Liberals are calling themselves these days, I'm sorry, I can't even remember, but or the Greens or whatever, you're people within your group and you want to get together and you all want to have a kind of chinwag about, whatever your politics is, you're allowed to do that. You're allowed to use that money. So there's any number of ways you can use the money. What you're not allowed to do is you're not allowed to funnel that money into domestic politics. You're not allowed to use it to campaign for your party in your country, your member state. And to give you some idea, parties of all stripes for many years have played a little loose with this. I'm going to be honest. I've seen it myself. Mostly because the rules are fairly loose. You have to sort of egregiously break them to get into trouble. As long as you can tie back the money that you're spending on the EU in any sense, and you can distance it from domestic politics in some way, you're probably going to be fine. And again, there's a whole way of doing this that has existed in European politics for a very long time. So my interpretation of that, and again, I want to say, it's not like I've read through the court documents or something and I have some sort of level of expertise on this, legal or otherwise, but my sense, just from knowing what the rules are in terms of European spending, is Le Pen and her party, Front National, I just feel like they must have really taken the mickey on this. Because I just think to get this sort of punishment laid down, they would have to, for it to come in front of the court in the first place. I think they would have to. So I get the right's point about leave the judiciary out of politics and all that, and sure, absolutely, let's not bring all this stuff into politics, but you have to understand as well that this particular thing that the Front National has been found guilty of doing is in and of itself a perversion of democracy, right? It's not even like they were embezzling the money to spend on prostitutes or something, which, again, that's a whole moral dimension. The point is, this was actually genuinely about French democracy in and of itself, right? So they have been found to have used EU money, which has to go on a certain set of things, on using that money to bolster their election campaigning in France. And, I think that, like, what are we talking about here if we don't think that actually it's essentially foreign money coming in to be used for domestic politics in France, which, again, usually the right really hate. And actually, they usually really hate the idea that European money would be used in any sort of way. If this was something around the Labour Party in Britain having been found to have used a bunch of, Brussels money to influence a set of local elections or something, I mean, the right would be up in arms. And actually, they would be right to be. But it's, for whatever reason, Le Pen has been given, sort of a green light on this, which I just disagree with. And I feel depressed that this always just sort of comes down to partisanship and whose team you're on, always. And we can't just look at, actually, maybe European money shouldn't be used in domestic politics and leave it at that. And if that's what Front National and Le Pen has been found guilty of, which it seems they have, then maybe that's deserved. Front National haven't been banned from, running. They can put up a candidate. So if they're more than just a one-trick pony, they should put someone up other than Le Pen. And if Macron is really as, on his last legs politically as they keep claiming they are, they should probably win. So anyway, I'll leave that there. Oh, except one thing. When Trump waded into it, I think he did that last night, actually, and he said it was a freedom of speech issue. I think this is really important because freedom of speech is a very important thing to me, personally. It's very core to my politics, and I really don't like when someone uses freedom of speech as a sort of cloak for something else. And it's just worth noting that the freedom to commit illegal acts is not in any way related to freedom of speech. That's just not related. And actually, if you genuinely care about freedom of speech, you should make sure that you never confuse the two. Right, so with those weighty matters out of the way, I'd like to end on something, well, I was going to say light, but it's not light. It's artistic, and it's actually, I will bring this back to the question that I posed at the beginning around, is Trump a moron? I promise. So don't just jump off yet, you politicos. I hope this interests you. So I want to talk about the jazz multi-instrumentalist Eric Dolphy, because he's someone who really changed my life. He was a great person, and bringing it back to the overall theme right away, he's someone as different from Donald Trump as it was possible to conceive, which is why I wanted to talk about him. Because when I was thinking about Donald Trump, I'm like, who's the opposite of Donald Trump? And I concluded that it was Eric Dolphy. Just to give you some background, he was a jazz multi-instrumentalist. He played alto saxophone, bass clarinet, flute. He actually played other things, but those were the three instruments certainly that he played at virtuoso level. He played as a sideman with loads of different people. John Coltrane is probably the most noteworthy, the most famous. He also played with Charles Mingus, who some of you, if you know anything about jazz, will know. And it's actually worth just mentioning Mingus and what he had to say about Dolphy when Dolphy passed away, which I'll come on to in a moment. But Mingus was a hard man to get along with by all contemporaneous accounts. He was not just with other musicians, but with other people just generally. And he tended not to have particularly nice things to say about people that he had played with. He was a very irascible man, a genius, but yeah, a difficult man. And this is what he said of Dolphy. I'll read you the quote. Usually when a man dies, you remember, or you say remember, only the good things about him. With Eric, that's all you could remember. I don't remember any drags he did to anybody. The man was absolutely without a need to hurt. And again, I think that's the thing that made me think about Trump was... I don't think anyone is saying when Trump passes from this earth, this was a man without a need to hurt. I don't think those closest to him and who profess to love him dearly would say that about Donald J. Trump. But I listened to Dolphy a lot when I was younger, particularly my teen years. I used to sort of put him on my Walkman back when that was a thing and listen to his albums. My favorite album of his is still called, it's called Out There, recorded in 1960. Wonderful album. I recommend it to anyone who's listening. Just give it a go. If you're on YouTube, obviously you can just flip over and go put in Eric Dolphy Out There and you'll find it. Out to Lunch was actually an album he recorded right before he died, which is probably his most famous work, which is also brilliant. Worth talking about his death. He died at the age of 36. He was on tour in Europe, and he was an undiagnosed diabetic, so he had diabetes and didn't know it. He went into insulin shock while he was on stage in Berlin. From there, slipped into a coma. He died basically because the West German doctors who were attending the hospital where he was taken in, figured because he was black and a jazz musician that it must be heroin or some sort of drug overdose. And so they treated it as such, and that was obviously not what was wrong with him. And Eric Dolphy passed from this earth. And basically, you see, that's what happens to good people. Good people of this earth, they die at 36 because of a mixture of horrible racial profiling and bad luck. And Donald Trump gets to be alive at almost 80 and president of the United States. But hey ho, there's a lesson in there for everyone. Please like and subscribe if you haven't already. I'd just like to state, just for the record, that the views aired here are my own and bear no resemblance, possibly they do, but possibly not, to the views of Bloomsbury Radio and the Bloomsbury Institute. And thank you to Bloomsbury Radio and the Bloomsbury Institute for hosting, as always. I'm Nick Tyrone, neoliberal centrist dad, and thank you for joining me. And if you haven't seen the rest of the videos, please check them out below. I've got some great guests and things and some other rants of mine that I've done that you might like or you might not. I don't know, but thank you, and see you next time.